Hello, welcome to the Sermon Podcasting Mini Course, Lesson 1, Getting Hooked Up. We're going to start out by running over your mixer and learning some mixer basics. We're going to move into choosing the proper cable for your application, and then we're going to finish up by talking about some computer setup. A lot of people look at a mixing board and they get a little overwhelmed with all the knobs and buttons and faders. Well, if you're one of those people, I'm here to clear that up for you. For this course, I'm going to use the Mackie SR244 analog mixer. And if you don't have this particular console, or even if you have a digital mixer, that's okay. All these concepts will apply. There might be a little difference in names. A bus might be called an aux, and a trim might be called a gain, that type of stuff. But all these concepts will apply, and the way you hook up really doesn't change. So let's get into it. So this is a Mackie 244, and if you really break this board down and take out all the duplication, you really just focus on this section right here. So if you know this section of the board, you know everything there is to know about it, because everything else is a duplicate. So that means we can forget about all that. Looks a little bit better already. Now you only have two different types of channels. You have stereo and you have mono. There's 2 stereo and there's 20 mono channels on this particular board. On Sermon Podcasting, we're going to talk about just the mono. So let's run down a channel from top to bottom just as the audio flows through it. So the audio comes in first and hits this trim. Some boards call this the gain, and this is basically the gain or the volume control for your incoming source. Then it runs through an aux section, which is what you use for monitors and effects, and we're also going to use it for our sermon feed to the recorder. Then you go through an EQ section, and there is high, mid, and low, and this is basically a volume control for different frequencies for the highs, mids, and lows. You have a low cut to cut the lows out of it, which is just rolling the lows off of the signal. We have a pan, which is only used on stereo signals, which most churches in their main system use mono. Then you have the fader, which controls the house volume. And you have a mute, which mutes everything in the channel. Then you have the solo button, which allows you to listen into certain channels. You have the assign buttons, which assigns the signal to sub 1 and 2, sub 3 and 4, or the left and right outputs, which is the main outputs. We are going to focus on the aux outputs. So that brings us to the cable. So let's choose the proper cable. We have 2 ends of the cable, obviously. One hooked to the mixer and one hooked to whatever recorder we choose. So let's talk about the mixer end and where we're going to plug this in to use the aux outputs that we talked about. In the aux outputs, you have 2 different types. Your board might call them buses, but this Mackie calls them auxes. And the 2 different types are pre-fader and post-fader. And then on this board you have 2 that are switchable, and if you press this down they become pre-fader. If you leave this button up, they become post-fader. We want to use pre-fader aux sends. And then what that means is it will take the signal level before the fader. So whatever you do with the fader will not affect the signal. If you take it post-fader, then it has to flow through the fader and the fader will affect it. So just know we want to use pre-fader. So we can use 1, 2, 3, or 4 as long as this pre is pushed down. So the aux sends flow out the back of the board in a little section right here called aux sends, right next to the main outs. And you can see you have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that corresponds to the numbers on the front of the board. So let's say we're going to use aux 3. So on the front of the board, we would push down the pre-fader, and then we would plug into aux 3 here with our cable, and then we would adjust this volume here to get it to the proper level for our recorder, which we'll talk about later. Now if you notice here, this says aux sends, balanced or unbalanced. So let's talk about what a balanced and unbalanced cable is. So this is the type of cable you use to plug into the aux jacks. It's a 1/4 inch cable, and there's TS and TRS. I hear a lot of people refer to these as mono and stereo cables, and that's only partly true. This is a mono cable, but this can be a mono balanced cable also. They're actually called TS and TRS, which stands for tip and sleeve and tip, ring, and sleeve. The TRS cable can be used as a stereo cable or a balanced mono cable. So we'll either be using a TS cable or a TRS cable, depending on what we're hooking to. So that brings us to the recorder end. For the recorder, you're either going to use a computer or some other type of recording device, like a CD recorder. First off, we're going to talk about a computer, because that's what I would recommend. That brings us to a question: analog or digital? Well, if we continue with the example I've been using, the Mackie 24-4, that is an analog board, and I would continue to hook it up analog just for ease of use. And if there's a problem, then we could get an audio interface and we would be hooking up digitally, which I'll talk about later. If you already have a digital board, you most likely have already hooked it to your computer via a USB cable or a FireWire cable, and you already have audio flowing to your computer. If not, hook it up with the cable provided. But in this example, we're going to continue with the analog path and talk about how to hook it to your computer. And then after that, we'll move on and talk about audio interfaces. So on the back of a desktop computer, you have 3 jacks. The green one is an output, which is a line output. The pink one is a microphone input, and the blue one is a line input. I would always suggest, if you have a line input, to use it as your input. It is expecting the level that your mixer is putting out, so you have a good match signal. You can use a microphone jack in absence of a line in jack, but you'll have to turn your volume down to avoid peaking and distortion. Unfortunately, on a lot of new laptops, they've stopped putting separate line in jacks and microphone jacks. They put in a single jack that is a headset jack, which is a microphone jack and an output jack in one jack. For those, we need a special splitter like this, which is a tip, ring, ring, sleeve. In that case, you need to get a splitter, which is a tip, ring, ring, sleeve split into a headphone out and a microphone in. And you would use this microphone in to get into your computer. No matter which input you have, a line in or a microphone in, you want to use the same cable. It is an 1/8 inch TRS cable. So the barrel is 1/8 inch and it has a tip, ring, and a sleeve. So if you go the analog route of hooking up and you find out you're having a problem with noise, even after you get through the section on improving your signal, you might want to get an audio interface. In an audio interface, like this Focusrite Scarlett Solo, which is a nice little unit, you can get this one for around $99, and you can plug into this line here with a 1/4 inch cable, and you turn this from instrument to line, since you're using a line level signal, and you use a balanced TRS cable. So it's a tip, ring, and sleeve, and you end up using that on both ends, so you get the benefit of a balanced cable, which will remove some noise from the signal. The last scenario we're going to discuss is hooking to a CD recorder or similar device. Most of these devices have an RCA jack on the back of them, so you'll need an RCA type cable on the recorder end. So let's review the proper cable to use. If you're hooking to a computer analog, you're going to use a TS male 1/4 inch on the mixer end and a TRS male 1/8 inch on the recorder end, the computer end. If you're hooking to a computer audio interface, like the Scarlett Solo, you're going to want a TRS male 1/4 inch on both ends. If you're hooking to a recorder, such as a CD recorder, you're going to want a TS male 1/4 inch on the mixer end split into 2 RCA males on the recorder end. If you're using a PC to do your recording, you want to check for some enhancements that are sometimes installed on the inputs. So what you want to do is, in the task tray down at the bottom, you want to right click on your little speaker icon and select recording devices. In the recording devices, select the input that you're using to record and click on Properties. And in Properties, click on the Enhancements tab. In the Enhancements tab, you want to click Disable All Sound Effects. Some of these sound effects could be useful, but I would test them out and try them because I've found that most of them sound unnatural and will harm the sound more than it will help it. So I would just recommend turning them off and working on your signal until you get it to sound good. Well, that's it for this lesson. If you have any questions about this particular lesson or suggestions on how I can improve it, don't hesitate to email me at dan@closersharing.com and I'll do my best to help you out. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next lesson.